A review code was provided by Square Enix. This review will also contain spoilers for Forspoken. Forspoken is the latest game from Square Enix and has been suffering from a lot of bad reception. From the viral tweet regarding the game's dialogue to the insane PC requirements. However, this is made by the people behind Final Fantasy 15, so how bad could it be? So let's explore the entirety of Forspoken and ask, is Forspoken really that bad? And just to add legitimacy to my thoughts, I actually purchased the game despite getting a free copy from Square Enix for review purposes, to remove the possible bias that I was paid off by someone, because that's also going around. Forspoken starts off in New York with protagonist Faye ready to defend herself for a crime she committed one day before Christmas. We learn that Faye is an orphan and has been committing thefts since graduating high school just to survive. Seems strange the court would have her high school degree, a photo of her reading, and a document of her being abandoned at the Holland Tunnel, which she took as her last name, alongside her criminal record. But I guess this was the best way to establish her background instead of allowing her to open up slowly about this information, just present it to the player as quickly as possible, complementing her personality of keeping people at a distance, which we'll discuss later. After numerous charges, she faces some serious jail time, but the judge decides to give Faye another chance since her birthday is tomorrow and she has potential according to the judge, and gives her community service instead. Outside, the developers established in a very obvious way that Faye is a good person instead of the kick the dog philosophy, which is to establish a bad person. Here we see Faye returning a phone to a person who dropped it, and a second time where she tries to help someone up after she knocks the person down when trying to escape gang members. But we see this in a short introduction to the parkour system, showcasing that Faye has some great athletic skills that are borderline supernatural. It's easy to grasp the parkour system. You just hold down the circle button and the direction you want to go and let the character do all the work. Now, we go home and see Faye is squatting in an abandoned apartment with her cat Homer, highlighting her desire for a fresh start, having saved what appears to be thousands of dollars. I don't know where she got all this money, but she has it. However, things go wrong as her apartment is set on fire while she's sleeping. To create more drama, the writers ensure Faye decides not to grab the money while searching for her cat Homer. Now, I get it. Homer should take priority, your pet should, their family. But the money was in a carry-on bag right beside her bed within arm's length. She could have literally put it over her shoulder and carry it while she searched for Homer. There was literally zero reason for her not to grab the money while she searched for Homer. And of course, the fire sets in and she can't get the money after finding Homer, and she has to leave her apartment. After being on the streets for a couple of days, she decides to give her cat to the judge that gave her community service in hopes of coming back, but we don't know what extreme thing she's going to do after losing everything in the fire. Heading to the Holland Tunnel where she was abandoned, Faye is engulfed by a magical aurora, and golden insects guide Faye to a squatter's den where she finds a golden van brace that calls out to her. Grabbing it causes it to attach to Faye, and she is transported to a fantasy world. Here we are introduced to the van brace, which Faye nicknames Cuff. Faye naturally freaks out, and Cuff informs her that only he can hear her, and she tries to speak to it while discovering that she's in a brand new world and doesn't know what's going on. Moving through the castle, Faye hides from a dragon that appears outside the castle, but she can't stay in the area for long because eventually she will need food. Heading outside, Faye makes note of her smartphone, showcasing Cuff, who doesn't know anything about her world despite making references to it. At the same time, Faye is oblivious about this world, and Cuff explains what this area is, revealing this world to be Athia, and the rulers are the Tantas, 4 women with special abilities who are responsible for turning Cuff into a vampire. Okay, so we have a setting, basic lore, and now a conflict, and our goal is to try and get home. Seems simple enough. Heading outside, Faye encounters mutated wildlife and uses Cuff's abilities to kill it, as the game plays like a standard third-person action game, with abilities to come as you defeat more of the core bosses. However, what follows is one of the most infamous things about this game and has set the pace for what people really think about the title before even playing it. I mean, I can't blame them. Just listen to this.
Oh, definitely with my assistance.
I did not just do that.
We did.
I just moved shit with my mind.
Perhaps our connection has somehow awoken some abilities.
I just moved shit with my mind.
I just keep hearing I.
I just moved shit with my freaking mind! Yeah, okay, that is something I do now. I do magic, talk to sentient cuffs, kill jacked up beasts. You know what? I'll probably fly next.
Now you're just being ridiculous.
Oh, that's too far. Good to know there's a line.
If you could just master these new abilities, with my help, of course.
Did you not just see me take out that gnarly beast? Oh, bring it, you mangled monsters.
Yeah, so that wasn't received well by many, and I can't blame them, as Faye speaks in a very annoying fashion, cursing every other sentence like a teenager trying to sound edgy. Now, I'm not sure why she speaks like this. It is established later on in the game that she's a bibliophile. She loves books, but from what I've learned through high school and college, the only people who curse as much as Faye does are people who don't have a very strong vocabulary or really have nothing meaningful to say, so they use this to try and make themselves sound more abrasive than they actually are. Maybe the developers thought this is how New Yorkers speak. I mean, the voice actor Elena Beleska, she actually does a pretty good job. The voice acting in this game is well done. But as someone who was born and raised in New York, I am a New Yorker, I can attest no one speaks like this. So I'm not really sure why they decided to go with this type of writing. But I did enjoy Cuff's dialogue, as we'll learn that he has a slightly better way of speaking. I mean, a lot of people have called him Discount Whitley from Portal 2, but I think as his own character, he stands on his own merits. But we'll explain that as we go along. Slowly, the game does introduce other elements such as gathering resources, which you can automatically pick up through the accessibility options. The game does have a lot of these, and they're always a welcome addition. The experience system and leveling system is basic. You gain experience, earn levels, and place them in skill points into skill trees that you gain from beating core bosses. Eventually, you'll gain access to challenges that further boost your skills. The overall presentation of the menus is amazing. I love the flair of everything here, with models complementing enemy diaries and important people alongside detailed summaries. This also goes for each chapter, so you can come back to the game at any time, or if you miss something important, you can catch up and read on the information provided to you. I always love these. I love when game developers put this in, especially with games that are designed to be over 20 hours long. Sometimes players leave and come back, as for example, I'm doing that with Hollow Knight, and I'm completely lost right now. Moving forward, Faye continues to think out loud and makes contact with a miasma. Cuff makes an astute observation that it may be the reason that the wildlife has mutated, but it's not affecting Faye. It's here that we learn you cannot move while Cuff and Faye are speaking, which is a strange addition. My best guess that this was to ensure players won't trigger other dialogue options while in the middle of speaking something else. But it doesn't make it any less annoying. Even just walking at a slow pace would have served as an ideal substitute than just standing still completely. Here we get some more exploring options, such as Cuff's scanning ability to find treasure before learning about blocking and evading on a mini-boss that is a bear who has been mutated. I honestly think the bear looks like the creature from the movie Annihilation, with the shimmer and it mutating with humans, but maybe it's just me. And yes, Faye does also have some strange dialogue when she's fighting, such as sorry, not sorry. Again, I don't know who speaks like this, but it's here and you're kind of have to tune it out sometimes. Inside an abandoned town, you can explore more, adding to the mystery of where everyone is. A new element is introduced here in the way of safe houses. Here, Faye can rest and restock on healing items, and they serve as fast travel stations once you get to the open world section. Rested and ready, Faye heads outside to find that the miasma, now calling it the break, is dissolving the creatures inside the town within this heavy storm. However, things go bad to worse when a dragon attacks, the same thing that was at the castle, and Faye is cut out from her escape route. Shoving you into the deep end, the developers give you an inventive way to learn the combat system, about evasion, piercing damage, and enemy weak points, such as the big glowing area on the dragon, which is obvious, but for other encounters it's not so obvious. Now, combat is very cinematic with a lot of particle effects and fancy attacks. You'll definitely have to keep on your toes, but the dodging system and the lock-on system is quite generous. In fact, I think From Software can learn a lesson from this lock-on system given how poor they are in their games, but the dodging system gives you enough time to evade attacks. But this isn't a fight you can win, but it gives you ample knowledge about the game's combat system, such as the undodgeable attacks and using the environment to block certain abilities. So there's definitely a lot to learn from this fight. The dragon does attempt to carry Frey away after losing the fight, but it quickly loses its grasp when Frey hits it in the face, falling near a city. You can't go and explore the vast area after you fall despite it teasing you. I'm not really sure why they did this when they could have just connected the two cinematics together, because there is a cinematic right after this, so it just seems weird that they didn't just combine the two, because obviously the player would want to go and explore the other area, but there is a "you've gone too far, please turn back" trigger. You head towards the city with Frey smiling, but this quickly turns into shock as the player is arrested and forced into the city's court system. Cuff explains this is the city of Cipal, and despite being in a different dimension, everyone speaks English. Frey naturally asks why this is, which Cuff just dismisses that languages share commonalities across dimensions, which makes no sense whatsoever, but it's one of those situations you just have to accept. I guess having a situation like in Final Fantasy X, where the player had to find alphabet dictionaries to understand their language, would have dragged down the experience. However, having a foreign language that Cuff was forced to translate for Frey would have been an incredible way to build their relationship. Having Frey doubt whether he was actually telling her the truth, it would have created drama and tension, forcing her to actually trust him, which we'll learn that Frey just doesn't trust anyone. Can we trust what he's saying in situations? Even towards the player, it could have been a dramatic situation. Are we sure what he's saying is true? And it would have created this very cool dynamic between the player, Frey, and Cuff. Inside the court, the people are naturally scared. As Cuff stated, only she can't hear him, but Frey is talking to him like everyone can out loud. This, coupled with the fact that she's wearing strange clothes and just came out of the miasma that mutates and kills anyone or anything that touches it without any problems whatsoever, this would naturally cause alarm within the people. I mean, they've clearly have been dealing with this for a while, so when someone just comes into their town wearing all these strange things, it would definitely be a red flag after red flag. The council, which is led by 4 people, is cautious and extreme in their language, but a healer named Auden seeks to learn how she survived, which would also be a prudent response. Regardless, the counselor locks her away in a tower, meeting things halfway between those who want her dead and those who don't want her dead. I mean, this was possibly the best option, all things considered. In the tower, we get more of Frey's enriching dialogue as she tries to come up with her next move. I mean, seriously, the writing for this game, I don't know who approved this, but it should have gone through a couple of drafts. Again, nothing against the voice actors. They did their best. They did actually a pretty good job. In fact, I do like Cuff's dialogue. It's just Frey, the way she's written. She's just so annoying. Like that person where you say, just stop cursing every second. Seriously, girl. You can come up with other words than fucking shit. Auden comes to save Frey and strangely is able to drug the guards easily with laced pastries and just walk out like nothing has happened. Even more strange is that you have to endure some very poor stealth sequences that really don't have anything to do with the core gameplay. In fact, there's only one other section where you have to stealth, and I use that in quotation marks. This could have just been one cinematic where you move through the area and just, fade to black and then fade to black again. The game does that a lot where they seemingly fade to black to cut from one scene to the next, almost like they weren't sure what scenes should follow one other scene, so they kind of just use that as a quick scheme or a quick issue to resolve the problem. Either way, you'll pick up on it all very easily. Despite being watched by everyone and being the most wanted person in the city wearing very distinct clothes that anyone can pick out, Frey walks around the lower city like nothing is happening. Audryn shares details about her life, losing her parents at a young age and having to survive on her own, but unlike Faye, used this harsh life to motivate herself to help people who struggled like her, and that's actually incredibly motivating and very idealized. You tend to like this girl because she really wants to help her people given everything that's transpired. Audryn meets Faye and reveals she is aware of the portal that brought her to Athia, convincing Faye to hear her out, who just wants to dismiss the situation and move on. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Where are you going to go? It's not like you have a plan of what you're going to do. The best thing to do, even though you're wanted in the city, is probably to stay in the city. The next scene literally comes out of nowhere as Faye is pickpocketed by a random child, and it's so strange. Like I said about that strange fade to black situation where they have through the game, it happens here. Look at this. Fade to black. The scene plays. I'm gonna fast forward through this, and then fade to black again, and then you're sitting with Audryn. So it's very strange. It's simply to establish this character because she'll be important later. The reason, so we meet with Audryn, and she explains that her father studied the break and the portal, which are called the Tirana, but I'm going to call them portals because they're portals. They don't need a fancy name. That brought Faye to Athia. I like this exchange because it shows how Faye uses phrases that are common on Earth but doesn't translate well in Athia, something that doesn't happen in reverse. Having phrases that are common in Athia would have created a great back and forth, but unfortunately it doesn't happen. It seems strange that this world wouldn't have like metaphors unique to the land and would cause Faye to look foolish in the eyes of the people of Athia because, you know, if this civilization's been present as long as we assume they've been, they would have like metaphors, stories, idioms, a lot of things that we have that we're aware of. Like imagine going to another country and them saying something that kids know about but you're completely oblivious of. I'm pretty sure a lot of us have been in that situation. I have when I went to Spain and when I even went to Hawaii. Heading out in the morning, Faye is introduced to the crafting system by the same orphan girl who pickpocketed her, named Olivia. The crafting system is simple, just get lots of the resources you find in the world and use them to build items to either boost your equipment, healing items, and optional enchantments that further boost your equipment. Olivia clearly takes a liking to Faye, seeing her as a big sister or maybe even a mother, with excellent facial expressions showcasing Faye's surprise and uncertainty when dealing with this type of situation. She has never had someone who actually looks up with her, with Olivia also portraying excitement when speaking about the Tantas. The voice acting is great. Again, I have to compliment how well it's done, and the facial recognition is actually very well done as well. So kudos to whoever did the animation. And you'll hear the disappointment in Olivia's voice as Faye speaks down about the Tantas because, again, she has trust issues. It's clear that Faye isn't the most trusting of person, and she's just given everyone the cold shoulder despite Olivia being nothing but kind to her. Outside, it's where we get the first taste of the game's open world. Faye is nimble and the world is vast, but quickly becomes apparent that the developers are using some dated systems to populate the world. Similar to a Ubisoft game, you'll find the same objectives peppered around the area to help boost Faye's abilities and show off her mobility system. This includes equipment, mini-bosses, and other statistical advantages that you gain from, completing objectives. Despite the vast landscapes, you'll eventually go into an autopilot mode as you open your map, find the next objective, and repeat the process over and over until you see that 100% marker. With more experience gained from heading into the mana pools dotted around the world that boost your experience pool. Many games have gone beyond this, such as Horizon Forbidden West, God of War Ragnarok, and Elden Ring to name a few, repeating the same objectives and assets, but molding them so they produce different results to prevent muscle memory from completely taking over. In fact, there are so many of these that I completed around 40% of them, and I was able to steamroll through all the mainline bosses like they were nothing, so it's definitely a substantial amount of this stuff to do, and it just becomes quickly busy work. Forspoken definitely falls under the umbrella of quantity over quality. The mainline story missions offer a lot of great moments, as we'll discuss later, but it's only about a fifth of the overall content offered. Now, there are games that do this, for example, Mass Effect and Dragon Age, but the side content always supplements the mainline content, and it's always something that is encouraged for you to do, not only for upgrades, but also after sheer interest. Why did you go and help Garrus in Mass Effect 1 to find Dr. Hart? I forgot what his name, but his name is Dr. Hart in the side mission where you encounter him. It's because you're interested. You're like, yeah, I want to help Garrus because I think he's a cool character and I want to see where things go. Or when you find Rex's optional family armor. All of this stuff adds, yes, actual game enhancements, but at the same time, it's the interest that should propel the player. Much of the game just focuses on repetitive side missions whose only purpose is to make you stronger, rather than pulling the player with sheer interest, which is what you really want to do. You know what's going to happen, and while the game provides a lot of lore of the game before the break, it's only really important to the main characters within Frey's narrative. This was a perfect storm to create some closed side stories that would build on this world, but many of these optional stories are just basically people you've met in the city that play a significant role in Frey's personal narrative, and I thought that was a missed opportunity. But regardless, since Athia is a fantasy realm, it should have had distinct flora and fauna. You'll quickly find that much of the landscape shares Earth's similar ecosystems, which would have given Athia much more character if they decided to just go completely crazy with how many fantasy elements they could fit into this game. Many of the creatures you'll face look amazing. Like, the animation is fantastic and the creature design is great, but they're often just creatures from Earth with a slight fantasy twist, meaning that they're kind of mutated, such as the wolves having exposed rib cages, or like the bears having exposed skulls, but it just doesn't go fully within the realm of this is a brand new dimension. Yeah, they do have things such as floating rocks and other things, but I felt like they could have gone much further down the line. Again, these are the people who made Final Fantasy 15. I feel like they would have enough creativity to go completely insane with a brand new dimension. So we eventually find Audryn's father in the tower, and Frey gains new customization options, this time swapping nails for different benefits. I found that you rarely needed to change this because I just used the default option for most of the game. The developers did do an amazing job of designing Frey's various equipment. You can actually see her nails change, same thing for her cloaks and her necklaces. They do change and they have extensive options of the way they look. I kind of wish there was a transmog option. I'm not sure if it's in the game or not. I didn't find it, but there are definitely some cloaks that look better than others, but either way, very good job on this system. The system does allow for unique builds, but due to the large set of skills locked behind story requirements, you won't be able to fully experiment until reaching the endgame combat, which is unfortunate. At the top of the tower, Frey is attacked by a man in a skull mask to find Audryn's father, Robian. Alive but infected by the break, but still somehow elusive instead of being completely mad and zombie-like like the people we've been encountering. Frey is excited that he may be able to get her home, but they're interrupted by soldiers who are under the banner of Tantas Scylla, who demands Frey come with them. Here we are introduced to shielded enemies who must be attacked from behind. Basic enemy types: fight them from behind, kill them, move on. Soldiers burn the tower along with all the research, but Frey and Robian escape. The two travel to Cipal, as Robian is unable to tell what memories or ideas are his own as Frey grows more annoyed with Cuff. Despite Cuff being nothing but helpful, her disdain mirrors her unwillingness to trust anyone, especially those who try to help her, believing they always want something in return. It's never really explained why she thinks this way. I mean, I get the abandonment issues, but what do you mean that everyone wants something in return? Like, it kind of hints to much more darker elements, but it's never fully explored. So if you're hoping for something like that, unfortunately it's not. It's more like a phrase she just uses to debunk everyone. Back in town, Tantas Scylla is rampaging through Cipal and taking Audryn to everyone's surprise. After some more poor sneaking elements, again, I don't know why this is in the game. It's really just unnecessary. We get a short exchange to learn that Scylla can change matter and being. Using a minion as a vessel, she starts attacking, where we learn of breaking parts of enemies. Frey is able to damage very specific parts on enemies, such as the wing of this knight we're facing, forcing them to change tactics. Unfortunately, it's a very simple system, as we can only destroy very specific parts. Another example that could have been made make the gameplay more dynamic if it was expanded on, such as if you destroyed both wings or maybe smashed the legs off enemies, something like the combination of Monster Hunter and Dead Space, where certain parts will cause the enemy to shift completely. Despite winning, Scylla killed many of the people in Cipal, including Olivia. The council argues in the background about what to do with Frey, seeing that Scylla wants her, but looking at Olivia's body decides to go to Scylla and take revenge. It seems rather cheap to use the death of a child to create such an emotional charge. We barely knew Olivia and only met her twice. The entirety of her death's weight comes from her being a kid and nothing about Olivia herself, which seems rather just... again, cheap. Like, why didn't you establish Olivia's bond with Frey over a course of, I don't know, missions? Or maybe even make it that she's severely injured and she's like in a coma or something, and then Frey goes to fight Scylla, and after defeating her, you're under a situation where you're not sure if she's going to wake up or not. Create more drama over it. It just seems very just like, yeah, she died, now you have to go commit revenge because, yeah, killing children is wrong. Again, yeah, it's awful, but there's no bond that's created between Frey and Olivia. Not to mention that Frey specifically told Olivia not to go anywhere near Scylla, and she did it anyway, so she's also a dumb kid who didn't listen about an obvious danger. The next morning, everyone is recovering from the previous attack as Audryn is happy to see that her father is alive. We are introduced to Pilo, a lower-class worker who serves as another accelerated narrative device, including fade to a lot of minor characters and the dynamic of the town that rarely leads to anything meaningful. It actually shows how lifeless the city is. With the repetitive character animations, people often just standing around. Given that this is the only city in the entire game, you would assume the developers would put more effort to making the characters move and interact with the landscape. For example, you learn that supplies are extremely rare since they cannot leave the city. Because of this, meat is rare and sheep are used to maintain grassy areas like cemeteries, since tools are also limited, since if they break they don't really have the resources to repair and fix them. You learn this while being introduced to a side mission which are called detours. Having more situations like this would have been amazing. Like, how are they dealing with the lack of wheat, water, wood, hell, plumbing situation? There are so many ways they could have crafted side missions that complement the living situation that everyone is dealing with. Heck, how are they having kids? Is there a situation with that where they decided no one can have kids for the resources that they have are so limited? But given the situation, you know what detours you do? Petting sheep. I'm not joking about it. Only one person can venture out into the land in order to possibly get resources, and you're having her pet sheep. It's a little strange. Pilo does attempt to showcase to Frey how Athia needs her, but he also tries to use her for his own gains, highlighting the contrast of wealth in the city with the lower and upper class that's never really brought up again. Honestly, Frey is justified to be annoyed considering how Pilo attempts to emotionally blackmail her in front of a bunch of, wealthy individuals who are acting very traditionally cocky, like, we are the best, we're the upper class, you shouldn't be here. And she just says, screw you guys, I don't need any of this, which... honestly, I would be justified to state it. The issue is it's never really highlighted of why Frey's walls are so solid. Why does she come off with her bitterness of being abandoned over and over again? Writers don't really do a good job of conveying that to the player, that it's delivered in an adequate fashion. Showcasing this would have added a lot of emotional weight to showcase why she refuses to connect with people, even those who are trying to be her friend and are nice to her. Just making her to be a dick who's just like, everyone just wants something from me and no one really cares about me, despite the fact that Auden actually does care about her and is showing that she does care about you and she's been nothing but nice. But she's constantly bitter, and the writers really do a poor job of trying to showcase why she is this way, other than a few sentences, but even then it's just very done poorly. Frey finds Robian acting strange towards the tree that is significant to the city. Since resources are limited, this tree is the only thing that can provide a rare sap used in medicine, so the guards protect it heavily. After an awkward conversation attempting to reason with Robian, Frey starts to open up to Cuff indirectly, actively speaking to him about Olivia's death, Audryn's hope despite living a majority of her life as an orphan like she did, and Robian's insanity, which would make it very difficult for her to find a way home. In an attempt to learn about the portal, Faye speaks to a former blacksmith, now archivist, who likes Odin, wants to save her world. So we learn that Johidi, who is this very abrasive woman, was loyal to Tanta Sila, but understands she must die for her home. Faye learns that the Tantas used their godlike powers to help the people into the break. Then they went mad after the break happened. In the city, we see everyone is equally mourning and moving on from Sila's attack, along with picking up more busy work such as taking photos, using your cell phone, despite you don't have a charger in this world, so I'm pretty sure that cell phone battery should be dead by now, and interacting with cats, which will give you added benefits later on when you find out the cats have been also hybrided by the miasma, but they're not hostile. It's a lot of fluff and very little substance. Again, this is the only city you can explore that has people in it, so why is everything so basic? Considering Red Dead Redemption 2 has multiple cities and camps that feel so alive because the NPCs are constantly interacting with one another. They're walking around, they're doing things, they're not standing around just like waiting for Faye to stand by. It's very awkward when you just go around seeing the NPCs do nothing despite the fact that they should be doing something. Heading into Sila's realm, we see that the shift in the tone to reflect her powers, with a drier canyon look to highlight Sila's fire-based attacks. Here, Cuff provides some more insight into his life becoming a Vambrace, such as coming to Athia, but infighting caused rifts that led to the madness within the Tantas, and Faye reveals her love for Kanish. At first, as Faye has been reluctant to share any details with Cuff, but now is more enthusiastic about it. Despite the new area, the game repeats many of the same objectives found in the previous area. Yeah, now you take photos, and there's the cat side mission where you slowly creep up onto like a mutated cat that gives you benefits when you go into a safe house. But it's just adding more fluff to the ever-increasing side content that is repetitive. There are also labyrinths where you go into multi-rooms and then finally fight a boss at the end of it that gives you more insight into the world and the break. But again, it's just more fluff because you'll just go through the motions over and over again. Heading deeper into Sila's realm, we are reintroduced to break storms, random storms that decrease Faye's health and call powerful monsters known as nightmares. The only option is to find cover during this sequence. After some more cringe dialogue, the duo heads to Sila's castle to find a huge town, but nothing to do other than head into the castle, which is a shame because this was again wasted potential, all things considered. For example, during this adventure, Faye does fight a lot of mutated people. Why not have them into the town, maybe show them they're not hostile in this environment and they're going through the motions. This would cause maybe a crisis within Faye where she doesn't know if they're alive. Can they be cured? And create friction between her and Cuff because Cuff believes they need to be put down because they've lost all sense of who they were before. They're basically just monstrous creatures who will kill anything in their sight. So that would have been an interesting dynamic within the town, but this is no different than the other open world sections that we've been exploring. So yeah, it's kind of, a missed opportunity. Heading into the castle, we get another massive information drop. Faye finds portraits of the Tantas, including learning about a war that was fought between the Tantas, their people, and the Reddick. But we also see some obvious events that anyone with a 5th grade education will be able to pick out. It's pretty much staring you right in the face about what the Faye's future is. I mean, it was obvious from the start, but it's even more obvious now. What follows is a battle between Tantas Sila, and it really highlights the best part of Forspoken. Like with the fight against the dragon, it's a giant cinematic fair where you have to use every skill at your disposal, dodging, switching talents, and using the environment to your advantage. If you find that you're too underpowered, of course you can go back and do more side content, but if you did about 50% of it, you should be able to take her on easily. The fight is very cool, but it also showcases that the Tantas are beatable, although Faye is a 21-year-old kid with very little combat experience, but she's able to beat this godlike being with decades worth of war experience. Either way, she wins and Tantas Scylla is no more. We absorb her powers and gain access to her abilities. The aftermath is actually pretty profound. Frey is dealing with murdering Scylla. Despite having killed lots of human husks and animals, Scylla was the first real murder that she committed, and in the next scene Frey just gets over it, speaking in a normal tone instead of becoming distant as it's highlighted in the cinematic prior to her fight. So it's a little weird that she just lets go of everything. Gameplay wise, we gain Scylla's powers, which focuses on heavy melee strikes and a new zipline mobility option that allows us to grab to certain ledges. Granted, it's not as responsive as say Sekrio's grapple hook or Assassin's Creed Syndicate, but it does the trick in when we need to get to higher ledges. Until now, we can only use earth magic, which primarily focused on crowd control and third-person shooting. Now we finally have a melee option, which you would thought would have been a default, but now we can actually use close quarters combat. And since switching skills is so easy, combos are easy to execute, allowing for some insane combinations. Best of all is that everything has its own cooldown, so it's clear that the directors of the combat system really just wanted players to have fun with it. It's definitely very great that you can just switch between each skill with such efficiency. Back at Cipal, Odin reveals the break has stopped advancing since the death of Tanta Scylla, and people are celebrating. The developers included a dancing optional side mission for some reason. I mean, it doesn't come off as exceptionally done as Cloud's performance from Final Fantasy VII Remake. It seems very stilted and more of an afterthought. I mean, just look at this.
This. You're good at this. Amazing. I won't be forgetting that in a hurry.
No need to blow smoke up my ass, but that was fun.
The overall celebration just seems rather underwhelming, just a rearrangement of NPCs with very little flair added. But, as expected, the Tantas take revenge for Scylla's death, forcing a breakstorm into Cipal and forcing Frey to mercy kill a lot of people. The people are demoralized after the sudden and massive loss of life, but Jehudi tells Frey how it is, that the people are starting to believe they can survive the break instead of just accepting their deaths will come eventually, and she needs to kill the other Tantas in order to end this. However, Frey refuses to commit more murder. I mean, they are forgetting that this is a 21-year-old kid. Like, she really just went after Scylla's out of bloodthirsty revenge for Olivia's death. But the aftershock of murdering someone is something of a profound action. But they kind of just, dart that aside and instead make the primary reason for her to just be selfish instead of dealing with the fact she killed someone. But most of the important things is that she just cares about herself and doesn't want to do anything to help them because, again, Frey is selfish until eventually succumbing to her wounds, which the people of Athia help her through this. In a nightmare phase, insecurities mount, highlighting how she's nothing but a screw-up and just sees herself as a leech, basically waiting for people to suffer because of her own actions. So it just highlights all her insecurities and her issues into this one dream. This should have been done periodically through the game. It's a really good scene which showcases why Frey sees herself in such a very low-key light, like why she pushes people away, why she doesn't want anyone around. She sees herself as a parasite in society. And again, nothing really complements this type of scene, even though it is well done to show why she keeps walls up. Yearning to try and get home, Robian is reaching at the end of his life due to the break infection. Grasping at straws, Frey heads out to find Balo, a special sap that is used for medical properties, but the city's tree has run dry since the attack. Learning of where to get more, Frey leaves, but during the journey, Cuff tries to convince Frey to kill the other Tantas to deaf ears because, again, she doesn't want to commit murder. I feel like this was something that could have been expanded on, but it kind of just fizzles out. The new area, Avalon, lot. It is a dense forest, and it's also here where we finally learn why Faye's abandonment issues are so extreme. Apparently Faye had many foster families, and everyone abandoned her after a amount of time had passed. The most significant was a foster mother named Ava, who cared for her and made her pancakes every morning till she found a husband and started a family, leaving her as well. It's a good scene to show that Faye's issues, but the writers simply don't do enough to build this up. To paint a picture, I played for a good 2 hours during the optional content before returning to the main quest. 2 hours of the same dialogue between Cuff and Faye as they said the same thing over and over again. Having the duo speak down and up towards one another diminishes any impact moving forward in the main quest line, especially towards serious dialogue. But if the writers built up to showcase past families, a lack of companionship and loneliness, while also creating new dialogue that expands on their current relationship instead of just repeating the same thing that seems so out of order, it would have made it that more profound. I mean, learning about Ava was a pretty cool moment, but at the same time, we really don't get Ava's side. I mean, the idea that she just started a family and decided to essentially return Faye doesn't make a lot of sense. You would assume that she would take her in as her daughter and say, yeah, this is your new stepfather and so on. So it just seems very just half-truths all the time, because when you start to think about all of this, it doesn't really add up. Maybe it's something that Faye did. Maybe she did something extreme. I don't know, but again, it just seems like someone found a husband and then just decided to return the orphan that she adopted. It makes little sense when you start to think about it. Searching for the resin, Tanta Pav sends soldiers to Faye, but she refuses to go with them. Cuff wants her to accept the offer so Faye can kill her, but Faye refuses to commit more murder, as again, she's not wanting to kill anyone else. After getting resin, Faye and Cuff get into a fight. Faye wants to just go home, and Cuff argues that she is the only one who can save the people who are suffering under the Tantas, and compares Faye to her mother, who abandoned her, which is kind of fair. She is the only one who can venture into the break and fight the Tantas, or the people of Athia and Cipal would do it. They would try and save themselves, but they can't get out the city while turning into monsters. This does convince Faye to help Cipal by using diplomacy, since Prav is a Tantas of justice. Faye volunteers to go and is handcuffed by her servants. Cuff explains that Pav can tell whenever someone is lying without question, and encourages Faye to tell only the truth or she'll instantly be executed. Face to face with Pav, it's revealed she could control water, and Faye stands trial for killing Sela, but clearly Pav isn't the most sane judge, speaking like she's 3 people instead of 1. What follows is a gauntlet of the same enemies you've been facing in Pav's realm as a form of retribution for killing Sela, but the finale is where the real challenge starts. The fight against Pav focuses more on raw offense, starting off with a simple arena before graduating to a unique area where you have to remain out of the water or face instant death. Where Faye jumps between platforms, she also has to try and combat Pav's rapid assault of water droplets and a giant sphere that can cause major damage. But like with Sela, if you did a lot of the optional content, you'll be able to just basically tank her damage and destroy her with little means. The fight focuses more on raw offense, starting off in a simple arena where you fought the ads before graduating to a unique area, where Faye must jump between platforms to avoid the water or face instant death, while demolishing Pav, who can use extremely powerful offensive attacks but require charging in order to execute them. As long as you keep up the assault, she'll die eventually, and if you're like me and did a large number of the side missions, you'll make short work of Pav, who reveals Faye as a child of Sita, which would be pretty obvious because, you know, Sela's castle, we saw the portraits and the characters look alike, not to mention she's the only one who could go into the break. I mean, it was so obvious from the start that it's kind of insulting to the gamer that, you know, you would make this huge revelation. Regardless, Faye speaks out loud with Cuff about being a Tantas and the possibility of losing her mind like the others because of the break. The most important question is what new powers you get for killing Prav. This time she gains new long-range water attacks are kind of worthless because your earth-based magic is just as powerful. Even when you face enemies who are resistant to earth, it's still a lot more effective, especially since you've dedicated a lot of experience to the previous abilities, having to dedicate new experience to these new abilities while completing new challenges just seems like a large waste of time, especially considering they're not that great. The best new ability is a new surfing ability, which allows you to get across water much quicker. It is kind of cool, I'm not gonna lie, but other than that, giving the player an option to just have a massive experience boost would have been more adequate here in order to allow them to capitalize on these new abilities, because it's kind of halfway through the game. Back in Cipal, Faye debates what to do about her possible mother, with Cuff confronting her that he'll be by her side regardless of what choice she makes. An interesting query that could create some interesting drama, but Robian remains focused on trying to get Faye home. Unfortunately, despite Aubyn's best efforts, Robian is at the end of his life, but reveals he knew about Faye's origin from the start. In fact, he's been telling Faye since the beginning about who she is, but because his memories and his thoughts were so jumbled and had no idea what he was saying, it's only during these final moments of lucidity that she finally pieces everything together, that he knew she was a Tantas from the start. In a truly Faye moment, she combs through Robian's tomes in hopes of finding a portal back home. Because of his death, he was the only one who could actually build one for her, which rightfully annoys Aubyn. She calls out Faye's selfishness and self-pity, which Faye attacks her for. I mean, just listen to this. It just shows how one-sided Faye looks at things.
What's unfair is the only person capable of helping us is too self-absorbed to do so.
I've shed blood for this place.
Our people welcomed you. They were frightened, rightfully so, but they still welcomed you.
They needed me.
What's wrong with that? People need each other. We help one another without complaint. It's the Athian way. Not that I should have expected you to understand that. After all, you're not one of us.
No. No, you know what? You are right. I didn't grow up here. I didn't have a community that supported me. I couldn't go and drink with my friends at the bar. I couldn't go outside and play with the kids. I couldn't walk on beautiful landscapes. I didn't have a mother or a father that wanted me or loved me. So no. I don't care what happens to Athia. If it's saved or if it burns, I don't give a shit, because this place is not my home.
Just leave. Leave.
With fucking pleasure.
Now, I get they were trying to convey Faye as a person who felt unloved their entire life, such as that dialogue about Ava and the pancake situation, but that's why she comes off as just childish and petulant in compared to Aubyn, because she experienced the same thing she did, but was motivated to help her people, whereas Faye just seems like a bully and an a-hole. Like, she simply does not act like a good person. I mean, Aubyn is right. This is the only person who can save her people, and she's acting like a petulant child. Like, I get it. She doesn't want to murder anyone. She doesn't want to hurt anyone, but these people need you, and it just seems like a double-edged sword. Yeah, you can feel like you don't owe these people anything for anything, and you can feel like they're just using you to get what they want, but this is literally life and death for them. If they had an option B, you can definitely consider they would be going for that if you were their option A. Faye brings her condescending attitude to Johidi, who probably tells her to fuck off, but without actually cursing her out, which is probably the most valid thing she could possibly say. And then she tells her if she wants any answers, she better go ask her mother, because the only person who could help her is now dead. Deciding to do that exactly, Faye decides to find her mother, Cinta, and demand to be taken back to New York. Cuff, alarmed by this, tries to convince Faye that that's the worst idea you can possibly imagine, because if Cinta turns out to be a corrupted just like the other Tantas, she'll make mincemeat of her because apparently she's the most powerful one out of all of them. He tries to convince her to kill the final Tantas before actually trying to go after her, but Frey is not having any of it. When attempting to leave Cipal, Frey displays more of a condescending attitude, even at condemning the cats, especially Olivia's cat, who is still very visibly mourning Olivia's death, showing no empathy for anyone and only caring for herself. Again, it just comes off as extremely unlikable. Cuff once again tries to be the voice of reason as Frey dismisses any reason to help anyone but herself, with a breakstorm just appearing out of nowhere. What follows is an interesting solution, but again, just like most of Forspoken, it's poorly executed. Frey is back in New York, but everything is different. She now lives in luxury, her apartment is lavishing, she has a good job, good friends, and her mother is in her life, and all the people in her life are the people from Athia. Many gamers will instantly see this as an illusion, as Cuff tries to break Frey out of her fantasy. It turns out Tantas Olays can recreate New York from Frey's memories and is attempting to trap her in this reality. It's one of the more interesting parts of the game, having Olays recreate Frey's failures in a city she wanted to run from. However, the execution again is poor, as you simply defeat enemies who are not really native to New York and smash lanterns to stop them from spawning. Why not use people from Frey's life as enemies while dialogue from Frey's tragic failures funnel into the background? I mean, if they built that up and had characters that Frey cared about and abandoned her and have them pepper through the environment, not to mention people from Athia who did try to help her and then, you know, just constantly break her will, like with Albin saying like, I helped you, I did everything I could to help you, and the only thing you've ever given me is cynicism and stuff like that. They do try to use Olivia as a guilt point, but again, this is a character you've only met about 2 times, and it doesn't really work that well. A great example of using illusion as a way to build emotional tension is Guardians of the Galaxy, where the player was forced to relive a tragic moment from Star-Lord's life. Granted, the developers built up that moment, highlighting how important Star-Lord's mother meant to him, so when the time came to save her and even stay with her, you understood the pain that it would take for him to actually break out of that moment. Here, it's just done as more of a gimmick. Thankfully, the music does make the scene. In fact, most of the music from Forspoken is pretty well done. Granted, it is generic in the way it's executed, but it is extremely well done in the way it's composed. So it's like I've been actively listening to it, and it is something that I will actively listen to. But it is fantasy stuff to the point that it's not really distinctive like something from Halo or Elden Ring, where if you listen to it, you'll instantly remember that from that game. It's here that we learn that Frey intended to what she intended to do at the Holland Tunnel at the beginning of the game. She actually planned to end herself, with Olaus attempting to convince Frey to go through with it. Cuff, being basically her only friend in this situation, talks her down from oblivion, explaining that he does care for her and he doesn't want her to go through with it. He'll stand by her. Even though much of the optional content's dialogue has the two contradicting each other, as I explained, the mainline content does the opposite and shows growth between the two, as they started to care for one another. As I explained earlier in the video, Frey starts to open up about New York and more things about her, and she also, even though she wanted to just leave Athia and just find a portal to New York, she still was speaking to Cuff actively. She could have simply ignored him, but she decided to speak with him. The boss fight that follows after this entire affair is pretty basic. You just avoid magical projectiles and hearing the servant come in when it turns invisible so you can actively attack it. The second phase is more of the same, but this time she takes more damage and she can cut off hearing and sight, so you have to avoid the projectiles even more. It's nothing too difficult in comparison to Silas or Prov's fight, especially again if you've done a lot of the side content like I did. You could just basically just bullet sponge the enemy damage and then just glass cannon it down, especially if you upgraded Silas's power with melee combat. With Oles defeated, we find ourselves in Oles's realm, a giant obelisk in the distance, and it looks pretty sick. I mean, look at this. It looks very amazing. And then that's where her castle is located. This area is surprisingly beautiful in comparison to the others. Not sure if it's the color or the draw distance, or maybe it's just the simplest design. It just looks so magnificent from my point of view. However, Frey also changes, deciding to be more concerned about the people in Cipal. Likely being faced with her own suicidal thoughts changed her perspective on life and actually does want to help these people. But again, it's so sudden that it doesn't really build up to that. I feel like they were just rushing through all of this stuff instead of actually trying to give the player enough time to digest it and fully believe that she actually went through these transformations. As with other regions, you can head back to Oles, or you can just do the repetitive missions to build up Frey's equipment and her statistics. Oles's castle is teeming with enemies and books. The irony of this being that Frey explains more of her love for books, but given her choice of words throughout the game, it's just hard to believe that. I've established this earlier in the game, in my review, where she just curses every other sentence, and it's hard to believe that someone who loves books this much would have an expansive vocabulary and just, you know, go back to just fucking shit instead of using actual words. Like I stated, someone who just uses curse words in order to amplify their sentences is someone who really doesn't have anything to say. At the top, we find Oles is dead, and her powers are absorbed by Cuff, but this time, something is different. Cuff removes himself from Frey, and the same insects that drew Frey into this world start to take form, revealing Cuff's true form. Revealing that the reason everyone called Frey demon from the start wasn't because of her, but because of Cuff, which is strange. Why didn't anyone just say something? Like, it's never really explained throughout the game of why no one really, like, explained that, hey, we're talking about what's inside you, what you actually have, you know, attached to yourself. Even if they just say it in some sort of mystical way, I feel like Frey would understand, like, what are you talking about? There's this type of magical ability in me. Either way, it just seems like a very cop-out reason of why everyone was calling her demon instead of actually providing some sort of insight. It's a lot of what I've been stating throughout this review, where the characters just seem to rush through everything instead of actually building up to believable situations. Either way, it's just not really a good villain in the execution of it all, because so like every good villain, Cuff starts to monologue, revealing that he is the Redic's last weapon to take revenge against the Tantas. With no powers, Frey attempts to run, but is saved by the dragon, who turns out to be her mother, Tanta, saving Frey and teleporting her to a new area where she'll be safe. What follows is a huge information dump, I mean bigger than anything in the entire game. Basically, you come to Sagana, the afterlife for the Tantas, where all the information on Athia is stored. Basically, it's just like Asgard. I mean, who needs to write a well-woven narrative that slowly provides this information at a steady and consistent rate when you can dump it all onto the player in one 30-minute interactive cutscene? I mean, it is pretty wild, and I think they were just like, okay, just tell everything to the player right now. So basically, after the war with the Redic, they created a giant weapon called sorceresses, which is Cuff. But the Tantas sealed it away by separating it into their bodies in the form of van braces. That's why throughout the game, each time you killed the Tantas, Cuff was absorbing the van braces' powers. He was essentially reabsorbing parts of himself. But during the process of separating him into their bodies, he drove them mad by constantly whispering in their ear until eventually they created the break. Basically, it's Baby from Dragon Ball GT. Despite killing them, the Tantas thanked Frey for stopping them since they were killing their own people. But without powers, Frey can't stop Cuff. But in true plot armor fashion, Frey gets all her powers back in a true girl boss moment where she just fights a series of bosses from the labyrinth sections of the game, and she just gets all her powers back in one swell swoop. She had a loving mother, which we learn about, who found New York through one of the portals thanks to Robian, slept with someone named Al that we know nothing about and the game never explains, and then she was sent away to New York before Cuff could control her, but in a last-ditch effort, he removed himself from Tanta to chase after Frey, obviously to use her in order to get back his powers by killing the Tantas, which is why Cinta wasn't fully corrupted. She became the dragon, but she essentially was free from the corruption to the point that she was able to regain her mind. After having all this information just basically thrown over your head about how the Tantas did help their people, how beloved they were, about Cinta giving birth to Frey and how much she loved her, basically just giving the player every reason to love the Tantas now instead of, all the horrible things they did, almost murdering Aubin, almost killing everyone, all this stuff, but, it kind of wasn't their fault. It was Cuff who was corrupting them and doing all of this. The game gives you two choices: a bad ending where you return to New York and everyone dies, or the other true ending where you fight Cuff and Cipal. Given everything that just transpired, learning all the information about the Tantas, learning that your mother loved you, this second option just makes no sense whatsoever. Seeing that Faye just embraced her heritage about being a Tantas and even helping Athia, having her just abandon everyone at this very specific moment is just so out of character, considering that, again, she embraces this entire world, her heritage, everything. Instead, they should have actually put this at the moment where she decides that she's done with everything. Like, literally find a way where there's an option B where she can locate a portal and just go home. So it just makes no sense to put it in this specific situation, because if you do choose that option, she goes home, she gets Homer, and then that's it. Completely disregarding the fact that there is a very dangerous gang hunting for her. So, not really sure if they thought that through or they just wanted to put an option B there. Either way, it just doesn't make any sense. The true ending is you deciding to fight alongside your mother against Cuff as he summons the mutants that were all over the world to fight and destroy Cipal. The survivors hold up in the library as Faye gives a motivating speech about them surviving and rebuilding, which feels ironic because, again, the last time you saw these people, she basically told them to fuck off and I don't want anything to do with you. So, not really sure why they would actually embrace this type of talking, considering this is the end of times. This is basically their apocalypse, their Ragnarok. Everyone's gonna die here unless they stop Cuff, and this person who was their last beacon of hope, last time they saw her, she basically gave them the middle finger and told them to deal with it yourself. But I guess this just works for the sake of convenience. Here, Faye says her goodbyes and attempts to repair any relationships before the final battle. Honestly, it does feel empty because mostly of the final part of the game is you doing busy work and you regaining your heritage. Since missions are connected to these characters are far between, you don't really interact with them, so you never really build that bond with them. And so having this final moment where you're talking to everyone and actually interacting with them, like in Scarlet Nexus or in Mass Effect, where you actually do build a profound connection between the characters because, there are many different situations where you actually have to interact with them, build a repertoire, a relationship. Here, it's just not there. But regardless, it's time for you to fight Cuff. The first phase is you just basically hitting crosses in the sky with your dragon companion, which is Sita, who eventually just dies because she has to, since she's overpowered as hell, allowing Faye to fight Cuff by herself. But of course she does the cliche, I need to know information, I have so many questions, and then Sita tells her that she loves her and she's proud of her. I mean, it's a moving moment, but at the same time it's just like, yeah, we need to remove the dragon because it's too OP. We need Faye to fight Cuff on her own. The fight against Cuff's first form, again, isn't anything special leading up to this. It's beautiful to look at, it's very cinematic, but basically you're just killing ads until Cuff finally exposes himself and allows you to attack him. It's not really that eventful. Just kill the ads, all the enemies that you've been facing throughout the game, and just wait for him to show his weak point. It would have been more profound if they actually had unique enemies here. Heck, create manifestations of the Athia people. Heck, you can create manifestations of the Tantas. I know that's kind of a boss gauntlet, but that would have been actually pretty cool. The fact that he's creating the battlefields in which you fought Tantas and you can use their abilities against them. Or maybe strip away your abilities, like in Devil May Cry 5, and you have to regain them by defeating the Tantas in an active battlefield where they're all fighting you at once. It would have been difficult, but I think it would have been a lot better than what we got here. Either way, now that you are fighting Cuff, you do gain all your powers back. Essentially, you gain your final form, allowing her to become a true girl boss where she awakens her abilities and now can phase through attacks. So she has her own unique skills during this phase of the fight. The fight against Cuff's true form in a one-on-one fight is actually pretty profound. This is where the real impact starts. We see the true intentions that really mirror Frey's intentions when it comes to Cuff's purpose. He has a single focus while caring about who gets hurt to fulfill it. He was a weapon bred by the Riddick to try and destroy the Tantas. That's his entire goal in life. He has nothing else to live for. Despite everything, Frey shows that she does care about him. Through small pieces of dialogue, she does want to end this thing diplomatically. I mean, even though Cuff wants her dead and wants to murder her because she is a Tantas, Frey actually developed a bond with him. And yes, she is not going to allow him to hurt anyone else. If she has to take that extreme measure, she showcases that she will kill him if she has to. But at the same time, she has bonded with him, and it really shows. I think this final fight really is what most of the game was lacking in terms of building that emotional strength. The fight does force you to use all your powers to counter Cuff's massive moveset, but in the end, Frey wins using the power of love. Basically, the rest of the Tantas combine her powers with her own, and they just hold the triggers down, and you blast Cuff, and he dies. Well, doesn't die, but we'll discuss that later. So with everyone saved, the break is basically receding and everyone is happy now. Frey helps rebuild Athia and decides to stay, but doesn't give up the hope that one day she'll get back her cat Homer. So we see that Homer is living healthy with the judge, and he does sense that Frey is out there and she will come back for him one day. Currently, there's no way to build a portal right now because the only people who could, Senta and Robian, are dead, but the research is there, so maybe it might happen if this game gets a sequel. Now, in the game's true final ending, we learn that Auden has joined the council, and most importantly, Frey reabsorbed Cuff. Similar to the Tantas, he plans to drive her out of her mind like the previous Tantas to fulfill his goal of killing them all, but Frey accepts the challenge. It kind of builds that kind of awkward relationship where maybe they're starting to like each other. Maybe one day Cuff will decide, hey, I'm more than this purpose. Maybe I'm better than this. But either way, the game kind of stops there. There's no real profound interaction past that. But I kind of like the idea that she sees him as a friend instead of just shutting him out of her life like the old Frey would do. She's going the extra mile to try and save him, essentially, and become more than what he was destined to be. Whereas Cuff kind of is just accepting the situation for the moment. I think it's an okay ending, and it can lead to something better if the game doesn't flop as hard as people saying it is, but we'll wait and see. Now that we've reached the end, Forspoken. Is it bad? Well, no. But it's not great as well. The game is your standard fantasy adventure with poor dialogue but promising elements. It seems the developers put more effort in placing optional content instead of designing mainline objectives, where Forspoken definitely shines. It also shows that they really rushed through a lot of stuff that could have been profound if they just built them up, such as Frey's abandonment issues, Aubyn's trying to be more kind-hearted to Frey in an attempt to bring those walls down, Cuff's issue with the idea that he was designed for this one purpose and having that built through the game where maybe Frey fights Cuff through a series of guerrilla warfare in hopes of like trying to get through to him. It definitely feels rushed in a lot of ways. And it doesn't help that the world does feel very empty. It seems the developers just decided we're going to focus more and try and populate this world or it'll feel very empty. The game does have a lot of polish that could have been revamped if it was just executed better. From my understanding, Frey's distrust of everyone to Cuff's creation being Now we've reached the end of Forspoken. Is it bad? Well, no, it's not that great as well. The game is your standard fantasy adventure with poor dialogue but promising elements. It definitely feels like the developers put more effort into the optional content instead of designing the mainline objectives, where Forspoken definitely shines. Like I stated, a lot of the optional dialogue repeats itself and it doesn't complement where you are in the story, showcasing Cuff and Faye's relationship actually growing throughout the adventure. There's a lot about this game that could have been polished or revamped, especially in the design of making it flow a lot better, especially in the execution between the relationships of certain characters. From understanding Faye's distrust of everyone to Cuff's creation and purpose being a weapon, which could have been fleshed out a lot better. It's clear between the dialogue between Cuff and Faye during their final battle that he just has this purpose, that he's just dead on succeeding, without having the logical question, if once you complete this, what do you do next? And that's something that could have been discussed or, executed better. Despite the world looking great, it is hollow and devoid of life. This doesn't mean you cannot create something like this with nothing inside and still make it feel very lived in. Shadow of the Colossus highlights that this is possible, but it must be done with surgical precision. Back when the PS2 launched, it was basically just empty ruins, large landscapes, and nothing in between, but they made it feel alive because they showcased that people did live here. You see ruins, you see prayer stones, you see remnants of what could have been large settlements. There is definitely life that used to exist here, but with the Forsaken world, it just doesn't feel that way. It just seems a bunch of assets were placed randomly throughout the world. There's no sense that people lived here. There's no cemeteries that are located in random locations, or maybe individual stories that highlight the people who left behind all of these things. Yeah, they do have small lore pieces that highlight this, but most of it is just complementing the more important characters that you have to deal with through the journey, instead of having something that goes from town to town, where you learn about, say, soldiers who are trying to help people, and then you can follow that story from town to town until you find out what happens. Gauge the player's interest so they feel more inclined to go from location to location because they want to find out what happens. Like in, say, Prototype 2, where they did different individual stories with the optional dialogues that you can find. Where Forspoken definitely does shine is the combat system. The dynamic changes between each of your abilities as you earn, defeating the Tantas, coupled with the customization system, allows for some excellent combinations. It's not deep, but it is engaging. But again, it also suffers from the same issues this game does. Like, it's not properly executed. It's only by the end of the game that you have full range to use whatever abilities you want. I get that they don't want to give you everything at once, but at least give us most of the abilities before you reach the end game so you can play around with something. The story itself has seeds of promise. It's the dialogue and the lack of fleshing things out just really causes this game to fall through. I don't know who wrote the dialogue for Faye, but dear God, if they took one trip to New York and actually talked to the people here, they would have known that no one talks like this. It just comes off as annoying, and I guess they wanted to sound edgy. It's just plain annoying. No one talks like this, and it doesn't compliment the character if she is a lover of books and just says the same curse words over and over again. Either way, I do think that Forspoken is a good game. I feel like if they sold it for $60 instead of $70, it wouldn't have gotten as much backlash, but it definitely is, and I do think $70 is a lot to ask for this game. Again, I enjoyed it. I paid full price for it. I got my money's worth, but trying to convince someone else to do that would take a lot of effort. For me, I would give Forspoken the most modest score of a 7 out of 10. Not an IGN 7 out of 10, a 7 out of 10. I do think this game is a mid-7. Like, if you are a fan of Ubisoft games, I really think you will love this title, and it does have its moments, but don't come into this expecting one of Square Enix's best titles. I do think that that's one of the biggest hurdles you're going to have to go through. As someone who is a fan of Square Enix titles like Octopath Traveler, Final Fantasy, this simply does not stand onto the same pedestal as those games, but it definitely has its merits. Same thing for Nier. Nier Replicant, Nier Automaton is some of the best games I've ever played in my life, but this pales in comparison with the density of those games. Either way, Forspoken, 7 out of 10. And that's going to be it for this review. If you made it to the end, thank you so much. Like it if you liked it, dislike it if you dislike it. Tell me what you thought of the games, your arguments towards the titles. And as always, I appreciate all of you who watch my videos. I hope you have a wonderful day. If you want to support me, join Patreon, all that stuff is below. But liking the video is more than enough. Goodbye. Have a nice day.